Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on Metaverse and AI. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob and Mr. Eric. First, I would like to give chance Mr. Rob.
Thank you and good morning. As we look out the metaverse, and the metaverse is going through a period of conceptual change, originally largely driven, at least to scale, by Facebook, now Meta. The most of the activity in the metaverse, the really commercial activity, is happening on the industrial and commercial side. On the entertainment side, our metaverse instances tend to be largely surrounding games, and have for a while. Before we called it the metaverse, games like Far Cry attempted to showcase what the metaverse could be in an entertainment environment. The underlying concepts of metaverse being bifurcated between this a concept of multiple disconnected instances versus one common instance that might have a bunch of different personalities or concepts associated with them is certainly evolved to the individual instance side at the moment. Connecting these things together appears to be problematic, and the people that are creating these metaverse instances aren't really motivated to connect them, and it's not really clear whether there'd be a huge benefit in terms of doing so. Being able to stay immersed and moving from metaverse instance to metaverse instance might be interesting, but at least at this current stage of development, probably not a requirement. You'll go into whatever metaverse instance you want to explore, you'll be in that instance, it'll be contained. Now, the metaverse contains a lot of elements, and the idea for the metaverse is to emulate in some way, shape, or form either real life in digital twins, in a way to either create and then maintain an environment, or to create something completely out of imagination and disconnected from reality. But in both cases, the typical way you would use AI is to create the other elements. You're certainly going to be an element in there, either as an observer or a participant, depending on the nature of the instance. If it's entertainment related, you could certainly see a movie metaverse, for instance. You would be an observer, but you would have some freedom of movement in terms of how you as an observer move through it, but you probably wouldn't have the ability to affect any outcomes, because they're whoever the author is going to want to direct the story. On the other hand, if the metaverse is about exploration or simulation, then you probably are going to be able to interact with things in this metaverse, and those things are going to have to be managed. They're going to have physics. They're going to have a way to interact with each other, and that's where artificial intelligence plays, either by giving capabilities to what we call in the gaming side NPCs or non-player characters, and making them seem more realistic. Robots, automobiles, and even the way that gravity works would all be defined and regulated by some form of artificial intelligence. You could do it with a massive number of moderators, but I just don't think the scaling would work out. And so we use AIs that are increasingly capable to do this. And the interesting part we're in right now, where we're moving from transformative AI to generative AI, is the capability of self-generating these metaverses. Because up till now, you pretty much had to scan things in manually or code them manually. But with generative AI, you can come up with a concept and let the AI do the coding, and that increases your ability to create scale. Because if you want to create a large metaverse, something that's really interesting, it's going to take animators years to do it. But with generative AI, you just need to come up with concepts, and generative AI fills the gaps. And now you're talking about months, days, weeks, months, and so, as opposed to years. And so the potential to cut down the cost of creating the metaverse becomes significant. Now, with all this layered AI, we do have a risk, and that risk is we start to introduce bias, we start to introduce error, because and we would say the same thing with people. I mean, it's not like people are perfect. But when you've got AI on top of AI on top of AI, a small error at the base level, the foundational level of creation, could become a huge error by the time you're ready to roll the metaverse out, because the error then replicates itself through all the AI instances, and carries all the way through. This could be interesting in a game, and it's kind of like when we're in a video game and somebody discovers a particular hack that wasn't in the concept of the creators and does something unusual. Either they find God mode or something else, or a weapon that shouldn't exist or do damage that does exist and can do an incredible amount of damage, and then it's up to the moderators or the support personnel to correct the problem. That too, though, is expected to be handled by AIs, and their ability to handle that could be fascinating. We're certainly seeing that with ChatGPT at scale. As people start to challenge ChatGPT, it's developing defensive characteristics. In some cases, it's become threatening. It certainly has shown it can be to a certain extent vindictive when it's being abused. And again, what we're talking about on layered AI is this capability of a problem like this vindictive behavior growing up to be significant and maybe changing the entire aspect of the metaverse itself. Now, in a game, it just means you reset the game. But if you're in digital twins and you're using this metaverse instance as a way to manage a large electrical plant or a large factory, that could be a serious problem as the machines start doing things they weren't intending to do, and certainly not creating the products that you intended them to create. They could actually become self-destructive. So in the end, our ability to take these AIs and drop them in the metaverse is going to have a lot to do, at least their effectiveness, it's going to have a lot to do with how we surround them with command and control structures and safeguards to make sure that they stay in their lanes. And if a problem is created, it doesn't propagate. Because a propagating problem in a computer environment can go from really small to really large really fast. And those mechanisms to a large extent don't yet exist. We are creators first, and then we tend to enforce and restrict second. And in this case, because we're talking about machine speeds, that could be problematic. We should probably be doing a far more in terms of creating the guardrails around AIs and understanding how they might work without restricting the AI's functionality far more than we are. Again, looking at ChatGPT and Microsoft's implementation, they implemented guardrails fairly quickly, and then I found they had to take the guardrails down because they removed the effectiveness of the underlying tool with the guardrails. And you can't destroy in terms of regulating something, you can't destroy the effectiveness of that thing. And so finding that balance is undoubtedly going to be one of the big problems we're going to have this decade as we roll this technology out. So I'll stop there and pass over to Eric. And we'll hear his thoughts.
Well, I think you hit one of the major points is what happens when you take something that's not very controlled and then you had a decentralized versions of people using that and putting all the pieces together. You have no idea. It's hard enough to figure out what we're going to get under one instance. When you put all those instances together, you have no idea what you're going to get. The variables go nuts, and the butterfly effect you talked about is one little change here can have drastic changes somewhere else or somewhere down the line. It is very important. But I kind of use the idea of what's happening with bots right now. I worked for one of the largest distributed metaversal game companies on the planet. I noticed that anytime we released any feature, any new thing, no matter how small it was, I just couldn't believe how fast bots would appear, like within an hour, trying to take advantage and skew whatever. If you offered some ability to do something, somebody would create armies and tweaks to take advantage of that, and it would just multiply. You'd have tons of bots out there doing those, and those are non-AI directed bots. That's just somebody writing code do that. Now imagine those bots become a little bit to say what's going on and to adjust, to adapt themselves. And then imagine the idea that, your bots can jump on top of other bots. And so we're already seeing huge problems and challenges with the ability of code to participate. Now you take code that has some intelligence in it, and crazy good and crazy bad things can happen. But, one of the things is this idea of personalization. if something's smart and knows what you like, I mean, we're already seeing the the social media trying to show you ads that are customized for what you like. And there's some good things there, because don't show me ads that I have no interest in. Okay, great. But it could really do things, because now Rob brought up the idea of creation. So now it can create things for you. For example, we got a grant to build the Center for Governance within the Metaverse, and I needed a building. So I just said, build me a futuristic building on the grassy shoreline of Ike, and it did. It gave me several choices, and we picked one. I mean, so it created that for me, and that was pretty cool. I just said, build me this, and it went and did that. So imagine that's happening on an ongoing basis, of constantly building your world and your interactions and finding people that would be good for you to talk with. Again, I think some amazing possibilities there, but I worry about what Rob happened is when people start building these things on top of each other, and we have no idea what the combinations of that interaction can do, good or bad. So I think personalization is interesting, and then that gives the ability to have more personalized avatars. Avatars adjusting and adapting, especially the artificial ones that you interact with. It can give you just the avatar you need at the right time to do that. So I also think one of the real challenge right now within the metaverse is interaction, because you have for example, we're creating an unconference right now, which is where the users are actually creating the agenda and what's going on with the conference. So that's very hard to get all these channels but imagine that was coordinated. And on the fly, it's predicting you want this kind of interactions with these people. And imagine that's happening at rapid scales, where groups are being created and brought together in customized environments and methodologies, whether that's through tech streams or social media or full-on 3D immersive environments. It could even know who's on here, what do they got to talk, what are they interested in. It can even create the graphics to talking points. Like, wouldn't it be really cool right now as we're talking that it's capturing what we're all saying, and it's building the graphics to go along with that as we're talking. So, as Rob puts out this great points, imagine Go gets these things and builds a graphic definition of that on the fly. That would be really powerful. But of course, you have to watch it, because, AI confidently puts out complete garbage along with really good stuff. So it could build a graphic that looks really true and really fun, but it's just completely made up and false data. And one of the problems with graphics is it looks the same. Like, I used to do weather forecasting, and I had the same kind of set of template graphics every day. And some days I would forecast the weather, and it was like, yeah, this is dead on, and the graphics look good. And the other thing is, yeah, we're just kind of rolling the dice on this one. Graphics look just as good. So I actually had to add that methodology in, that I would had to quantify that by saying, here's this nice picture, but I wouldn't bet on it. Or I'd put picture and I'd do a minimum bet. Or here's a picture and I would bet whatever the house will let me to bet on this one, to let people know what goes on in making that, because there's so many pieces. So, we kind of talked about personalization and interaction and avatars. And we talked about content creation, the fact that it can create things. But another thing is really, it's very tough right now with all the interactions going on. Like when we do summer stuff, it's streamed on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. and at the same time, people, while they're going on, are using chats and Zoom, and here's these separate chat streams going on, and Telegram and Discord. It could really do some things on moderating all that stuff, because that is just too hard for one person to keep track of that, especially both synchronously, and in real time and asynchronously. Someone to bring all that information and keep everybody on track and figure out, I think, would be a real good thing. So I guess I would say the potential of the metaverse is amazing. The speed at which things already happen, and by that, the technology is proceeding along its measured path. But just the speed that I see on a daily basis of 2 people meeting or 5 people meeting and saying, "Hey, let's do this," and whether they create a Notion website or create a PowerPoint or a document or build code, it's just happening so fast. So speed is a good thing, except when it's not. So I'll leave with that one. Speed is a good thing, except when it's not.
Where is Dr. Talib? He joined. Dr. Talib?
Lost you for a little while.
Yes. Yes.
Lost you for a little while.
Yes.
Okay, I'd rather hear what Rob has to say first, please.
Okay, Mr. Rob.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem here. Is this idea of personalization at scale, and let's take it all the way out. When you talk about the metaverse and AI, we have the potential of creating content that is uniquely tied to the observer or to the participant or to the user, depending on how you're defined, and we have the capability of doing that at scale. So there's the possibility that the books you read for entertainment, even the books that you read for education, could be structured dynamically in a way that either for entertainment that creates maximum entertainment engagement, and if you're learning, that creates maximum retention and interest. So the example I've got, at least in my own life, was the difference between when I took theoretical calculus and applied calculus. And I was always good at math until I hit theoretical calculus, and I flunked that course. I mean, I just didn't get it. I just fundamentally just hit a wall. And then I took applied calculus and second highest grade in class. I loved that. That was a lot of fun. And the difference was how I like to learn it, and I learned typically by applying what it is I'm picking up. That's how I picked it. So theoretical calculus didn't work for me because the constructs that were used to teach it weren't things that I ever thought I was ever going to use or conceivably be interested in. And so I was just never interested in the material. And as a result, I failed. Where with applied calculus, the same kind of content was presented in a way that I could apply it and do things with it. And so it was fascinating. I was solving problems that were interesting to me, and therefore I came through the course material. God save me if I ever tried to do it today. I've probably forgotten most of it. But I enjoyed the material, and I came out at the end of the course being able to be tested with the very top of the class. And the difference was how I like to learn. And so you could certainly see in a metaverse teaching environment where if you understood enough about the student, you could construct an environment that would be most effective for the student and provide the highest return in terms of being able to pick up the material and carry it forward and using it once they came out of school. One of the biggest problems with education, in my view, is the vast majority of what you learn you don't retain, and nor will you ever use in your life, mostly because you don't retain it, and that's a huge waste of time and effort. I mean, it teaches you kind of how to learn, but it doesn't really even teach you how you like to learn or the best way to learn for you. Now, Metaverse could fix that, because you get a sense of scaling that is dramatic. Now, the problem is who would moderate that? I mean, who would assure that the outcome is the one that you intend? In other words, if somebody goes in who has a significant anger and violence problem, might they come out with an even bigger anger and violence problem, because the kinds of things they would be interested in and the system would try to optimize for would be consistent with that defect. And so identifying the defect and moving to correct the defect would need to be an important part of the overall exercise, but not part of anything that I've so far seen created in simulation. So we tend to be very linear. You'll get what you want, but what if what you want is bad for you? What if what you want is going to do you harm? Well, that's not really part of the equation right now. And understand the difficulty in fixing that problem, because just because I think it's going to do you harm doesn't necessarily mean it will do you harm. I look at some of the underlying concepts that we're dealing with in the world today, of restrictions on women, restrictions on certain ethnic groups. If I'm the one that's on the restriction side, then I'm going to design a program that puts those groups in their boxes, which would not be good for those groups. It would be harmful for them, but since I'm the designer, I would have control over what it was that they saw. And those groups would have no ability to get around that because I control the system. And there lies the underlying problem. Recently, I saw Insider had a story about this idea of digital angels, the concept of creating constructs, AI constructs, that would have your best interest in mind and would be customized to helping you out individually. And so if you were in theory, if you were in a situation like this, where the metaverse construct was doing you harm, that digital angel, which would be in there with you, but be part of your construct. In other words, it was designed specifically with you in mind and with your participation, would then move to defend and help you and hopefully help you survive the experience or extract you from it, so that the harm wasn't done to you or to a large group of people at scale. Those underlying elements are going to be critical to creating a metaverse that is safe, that helps make diversity a positive as opposed to potentially a negative thing, and create environments that are helpful for all as opposed to helpful for just those that are in power or those that are controlling the construct. And as we look at these constructs, we look at existing constructs like news programs, political programs, and the rest, you can see that inherent bias, this desire to get people to think the way that you think. And the metaverse could be a massively powerful tool to do that. But in terms of diversity and creating a difference of thought and innovation, it could be very damaging to the race in that way. In fact, if we put everybody in a metaverse and only gave them the things that they enjoyed and only gave them the things they wanted, we would probably have a culture that was largely dysfunctional. That couldn't, because all our desires, all our goals, that they would be unaligned, and so we wouldn't be able to get anything done. So being able to pull this stuff together to the benefit, there's an old concept. What was it? I think it's a concept from everyone, but from the capability to everyone according to their need. I'm paraphrasing badly, but the metaverse could do that. And could do that at scale. But the issue is the folks that control and oversee the metaverse would have to be altruistic in nature, and as a race we tend not to be. So the metaverse to function with artificial intelligence has to have at its heart the furtherance of the race as a goal. That furtherance concept really has to be created outside of the constructs we currently have, outside of any existing government, outside of any existing religion, outside of any existing mindset, focused ideally on the optimization of the race. And I don't know how we do that. In a practical sense, if we don't have that aspect, then by its very nature, it's going to be biased. And it's going to be biased towards the people that control the construct, and those folks then become the dictators, despots, or whatever tomorrow, because we know power corrupts, and this would be the very definition of absolute power corrupting, absolutely. So finding a way to protect against that is going to be, I think, one of our greatest problems going forward. This concept of an AI guardian angel, I think, is a good one. Concept of a defensive AI is also a construct that both Lifeboat Foundation and Google's working on. But I think it needs a great deal of additional focus, so that these constructs, these safety constructs, these AI facilities that are designed to help preserve in some cases preserve our uniqueness, and in other cases just make sure that we're not abused, are incredibly important to assuring the positive outcome of this effort going forward. And I'll now pass the ball over to Eric, because I think he's got something to say in regard to this.
Sure. The first thing, when you talk about tailoring learning, I've had several of these classes with differential equations and calculus where one particular was a rotational fluids class, and we went over it all semester, over and over. And then the final last week, he showed us pictures of what we've been talking about. First time, oh, here's a video of what we're doing. Like, why didn't you show that week one? And the teacher said, well, you wouldn't have understood it then. It's like, well, no, if you'd showed me what we're doing and then use the math to explain it. And that's not the first time that I had to stop somebody and go, what are we doing? I see the things on the board. What are we talking about here? So I'm like you, if you apply it to the universe we live in, it's kind of helpful. And so that idea of tailoring is pretty good. I think, we all kind of believe that we should make the world a better place, and we all kind of believe in ethics, which brings us to that second topic that you talked about, which is what's good for us. And there's kind of always been this battle in everything we do between who should be allowed to write your life. Should you be allowed to write your life, or should others write your life? What role do you get? In some places, well, you're born, so this is the neighborhood you can live in. Here's who you can marry. Here's your choice of professions. Within this environment, you choose. So they would view that as being good because we're, writing your life. When you go, if you subscribe to the ability that everybody should write their own life, which is kind of at a core of some countries, like an American idea is, no, everybody gets to write their own life. One of the problems with that is not everybody's good or even wants to write their own life. So if you get here you are, write your own life. It's like, but I don't know where to go. This is somebody do it for me. And the danger of that, of course, is whoever you write in first, that's the story you're going to write. But now you take the metaverse and you say, write your own life. You can write all kinds of stuff. People get upset on, skin color. Well, what happens when you add tints of green and purple and into that? It's like, well, what does that mean? Some people get highly offended by that idea. Is no, this is the story we've written. You need to fit in that story. And the other point that I think you brought in really well is if you give me what I want, is that good for me? I'd like to have lots of sugar, maybe tobacco and alcohol. Yeah, that would be really good. And, maybe I don't want to work. And so what you want is not always what you need. So how do you get an angel that does that balance between how much of your life you should be able to write and how much should be written for you? Because we're asking these AIs to go ahead and write your life. Here's how you're going to interact today. Here's where you're going to go. Here's what you're going to do. So that's interesting. So I think that really key effort on what you want versus what you need. And if I want to only get my news source, my information source from one channel, and whatever it says I follow, that's inherently bad for us because information gets distorted, and when it's unchallenged, it's bad. Like, I've spent a lot of time in martial arts, and the art only deals with certain rules, and everybody only does that. And I remember when the Gracie Jiu-Jitsus came in and said, well, I'll just grab you and throw you on the ground. No, we don't do that. We don't do that because in my world, that's not possible. So unless you have something challenging your ideas, and I bring that up because it's kind of good sometimes to be pushed when ideas, and AI could actually help with that. Say, if we're getting complacent in our lives, and where, how do you push enough to not do harm, but to make sure that the ideas live and are tested. I mean, that's one of the great things about the metaverse, is you can test all these ideas without the harm that in the physical world that could do. You could say, I'll test the idea of how it would be to get on stage in the metaverse. That's way different. Said, I think on my first test is I'll go speak in front of 10,000 people. It's much better to test these assumptions in there. But, how do you control that idea of which assumptions are going to be tested by who, and who's going to write that, and what's allowed when somebody, is writing this world? Is virtual drinking allowed? In some places, is dancing allowed? In some countries, public dancing is just outlawed. And we're just talking about just moving to music, not any burlesque show, just moving to music. No, you can't do that. That's not allowed. So who gets to say that? Another key is, when we're talking about what we see, there's this idea of what's running this in the background. And of course, a lot of the metaverse is driven by blockchain. And so within blockchain, you've got more data. So you've got what people are doing, and where and when and why. You've got more data than you've ever had. So the data analytics that go into this, rapid change with AI. Another thing is security. If you get AIs designed to poke holes and find and secure things, not only can they be used to violate security, they could be used to enhance security. I think one of the big things is, one of the biggest challenges we have in the metaverse is writing contracts. This idea of code is law, because you don't get to say, well, I think then a court will go ahead and handle it later. It's like, no, if you pay for a room and you don't get a room, or they give you the room and you don't get money, those things happen. You got a room, validated. You got money, validated. They reach a contract. Okay, money for room, switch. There's not that room for, well, we'll just go to court and handle it. So I think that would be really good for AI to test out all the assumptions in a smart contract. You thought of this, but let's test this. Let's throw all kinds of things at that contract and say, oh, you didn't really figure out if somebody gets the room, but it's not up to what you thought it was, but it wasn't in your it's able to explore those. And I think testing out our assumptions when we make and implement these rules, and we're talking about, who makes the rules and what rules are allowed, that's one thing, but testing the rule to see if it really does what you think. Usually we don't find out till we make a rule, and then we have some disasters from that rule. We go, oh, we need to change, delete, modify that rule. So that's important. And another thing is, these decentralized, automated, autonomous organizations that run that. Well, those are things AI can set up on the fly, as these organizations, with all the infrastructure and all the rules back there, and the predictive analytics to go. So, yeah, those are, I think, interesting points. Is how you learn, who writes the rules, and how about the infrastructure that's going to support and actually run all this stuff and make it happen, not just react to us in real time. So I'll turn that over to Talab.
Sharif, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I've listened very carefully to all what you've said. What you've said is absolutely correct. Now, what we need to concentrate on here, in my view, is the fact of monopolizing the truth, monopolizing the ideas. And that's what Rob talked about. You can't have anybody monopolizing the ideas of any person on earth anymore.
And I think the idea of testing truth, testing the assumptions, a lot of times we say something we're convinced is true, but it'd be really interesting to have, the AIs testing that truth. Just like fact checking, I think, would be a really important thing. I remember seeing one of the first presidential interviews where people were fact checking it while they were talking. that was incredibly eye-opening. He made this statement, well, it's kind of true, or no, that's not true. So I think the ability to have that running dialogue of if it's truth, and then even testing the truth, it would be an interesting thing too.
Yes, Eric. But what's truth and what's not true depends on you. You have to be the judge of what you want to decide on after you hear everything. That's the point. You can't just.
Well, the first part of truth is the facts are even right. That's the biggest thing, is people throw a lot of what we deal with on a daily basis that we think are facts or not, like in every show you have to wait 24 hours before you report somebody's missing. Yeah, that's not a thing. Yeah. That's not a thing, but we all believe it.
You're right. You're right. You're right, Eric. I think you're right. Right there. So what I was going to say is the fact that nobody has the right to interfere in anybody else's thinking and reach conclusions as a result of that thinking, because that could be manipulated by rulers and dictators. And that could drive us as human beings into the pits, really. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, it's an interesting in the concept of what's better for you versus what's better for society. So there was a movie a few years back called Brainstorm with Natalie Wood, and in the movie they'd created a technology that allowed a machine on this massive tape player to record what was going on in your head. And one of the participants in the movie had sex on the machine and recorded the orgasm, and then put that tape in a loop and fed it back into himself. So he had multiple orgasms and nearly died. And then he was walked around unable to function because of the experience of a constant pound of pleasure that was going through his head. And then eventually I don't remember if that character died, it was another character that died, but they recorded the death of a character, and if everybody played that tape into their head, they died. And it was kind of a quick way to kill somebody. But the underlying concept of being able to take pleasure, take happiness, take whatever that we enjoyed, and then filter it right into our brains, and then basically turn the individual into a non-functioning but very happy user is troubling, because we took what Tlaib pointed out is how bad it would be if somebody took, it wouldn't matter whether a government official or a scientist, but took control. The question would be, would you be happier? Would people be happier controlled or happier independent? And in many cases, we found that people are actually happier when they're constrained and controlled, as long as they're not abused. They're actually happier when somebody tells them what it is they're supposed to do, and that's problematic, because we design the system on a happiness with a happiness goal. I'm trying to make people as happy as possible. You could certainly argue maybe they'd be happier if they were largely controlled and they weren't allowed a tremendous amount of latitude and concern about making right or wrong choices, because those choices we made for them. And they mostly just live in the environments in which they enjoy. We see this with kids in video games a lot of times. The rewards in video games keep the kids in the video games, and they don't want to do anything else. And they're happy playing the video games. We just had an instance here in the United States where a administrator took a Nintendo, a video game went for a kid, and the kid nearly killed the woman that took the game away from him. He's been hauled off. She's in the hospital. But the reaction was violent and extreme when they took the video game away from him, because that was his way of being happy. And without the game, how dare somebody remove his happiness? And you could see that could be a real problem at scale. Either you keep people like that in the video game and never let them out. It certainly could redefine the prison system, but you might have people actually trying to get into prison because that's the life that they want, is in prison. They say, well, maybe that's good for society because these people otherwise would be outside committing crimes. except some percentage of those folks might have been productive members of society if you hadn't just put them in prison and locked them up in some ideal fantasy world and never let them out again. So that
Well, is it
this balance.
For example, is it good putting people into school? School has restrictions. It comes in there, but for an entrepreneurial personality type, that. So there's a big difference between, some people, oh yeah, that's good, love school, go in, do that. Other people, it's why are we wasting time here when we could be doing something else?
Doing stuff, it's be out there. Depends on the individual.
And for some cases in the morning, or the stage of development, one of the biggest problems I'm always amazed at is what we hate most in kids is when they behave like we're training them to be. Excuse me, you're going where we want you to go, but we don't want you to go there yet. So stop behaving like we're trying to train you to behave, and behave like we want you to be right now.
And it's an artificial construct. There's no proof that either of those paths would be best for the kid. There's no empirical evidence, and we don't really do a lot of work on getting that empirical evidence to figure out which path would really be best for society or the group. We do have a great deal of understanding about what would please the individual, but not necessarily what would be best for the individual long term. And it's that lack of information on the back end that I think it's going to cause us severe problems as we build these constructs. Because it's easy to build stuff, as we've seen with social media. It's easy to build stuff that keeps people engaged. It's pretty hard to build stuff that keeps people engaged and doesn't do harm. And figuring out how to do the engagement, the enjoyment, and avoiding the harm part, I think is going to be where the heavy lifting is going to be.
But it'd be pretty interesting to run those simulations to say, with more and more information, say, if we do this, what is the outcome of that going to be? If we add this restriction, what it would be? And not just for people in general, but that individual.
Well, as I say, the danger is biasing the simulation. So that because if we want a particular outcome, we are certainly capable of biasing the simulation to get that outcome. But then when we apply it to real world, the outcome won't match the simulation. We've kind of screwed ourselves. But when we're talking about the metaverse and existing within the metaverse in some of these constructs, we might not find out we did damage until way late in the process. As opposed to early on when it could be corrected. And that takes me back to that concept of having that AI guardian angel to make sure things stay on track, that the interests of the individual are kept in place. But man, this is not going to be easy.
And who programs that AI angel? That's the big thing.
Right, because I wouldn't know how to program the AI that would take care of me, and I've got to rely on that whoever did program it to have my best interest at heart, and I don't even know what that best interest is. And if I don't know, how are they going to know? I mean, we have a distinct issue here, is that to a large extent, we really don't know what makes us happy. Not at scale. We can say, okay, well, going to Disneyland, that was kind of fun. But what aspect of that made us happy? Why did we enjoy that trip to Disneyland and we hated the prior trip to Disneyland? Do we ever even sit there and contemplate the underlying differences between the enjoyment and the disenjoyment of the underlying events? And it's that information we need to know, even to create a construct that does what we want it to do while still causing the participant to enjoy the process. And that's the promise of the metaverse, is to be able to do both those things, to be able to take you through a life experience and have you come out the back end better and enjoy the process as you went through it. But now let's put in a different concept. Maybe enjoying the process isn't the best way to learn something. Often we learn better when we don't enjoy the process. We learn by making mistakes. But if the system doesn't allow us to make mistakes, so we never get that aspect of it, then the first time in the real world, when we don't have the construct around us that we get a mistake, we collapse. We see that a lot with the younger kids coming out of school. They've been so protected throughout the education process by their parents and allowed to do things that they're not going to be allowed to do in business. They come out and they hit business and they flame out. I mean, it's like they hit a wall, they get fired, they get depressed. The world isn't at all what they were trained to deal with, because we didn't train them in adversity. But if we create diversity, we drop it into the system, people will avoid the diversity. They don't want that. It's unhappy. It's a conflict. It's annoying. Why should I have to experience the conflict? Let's just drop into a world where everything is hunky dory and roses and lollipops. And at the end, then we're not creating a race that can sustain against adversity. So that creating that balance between adversity and pain and progress and happiness, so that the person that comes out of the metaverse process, whether it's education or work or simulation or whatever, is always better than they were when they went in, has to be an underlying precept. And there needs to be measurements placed at both ends. So when we see the mistakes coming at the back end, they can immediately be provided to the front end. So it fixes the process flowing through it. But again, that circular concept, something that exists in manufacturing today, doesn't yet, at least as far as I can tell, doesn't yet exist in the metaverse world that we're currently creating.
And I think that discomfort factor is really important to it. When I used to train people, I would say, here's where you are. If you want to get here, you can't get there without being uncomfortable. But here's the thing. You don't want to be uncomfortable all the time, because then that you get tired of it and it wears people out. So you got to get the right amount of discomfort. But I used to ask them, where is the meter? Are you comfortable, uncomfortable, or overwhelmed? Because overwhelm is not good either. So keeping the right level of discomfort. I mean, kids don't mind being discomfortable to get to a goal. Oh, you mean I have to learn the math to get through this thing? My kids, I don't want to learn math. And all of a sudden they're doing this card game and they're doing math. Oh, well, it's 10, you got 5 points of that. Well, okay. Well, you were uncomfortable to learn how to do this game. Well, why did it? Well, because I like this goal and now it's comfortable. Because the thing is, if you're uncomfortable with something, it can become comfortable. And so it's a moving target of feedback. So, an AI figuring out the right discomfort, the right level of discomfort, the timing, and making sure it doesn't go to overwhelm, I think is a great point.
Well, but maybe we need to have it go to overwhelm at least a few times so people understand how to deal with being overwhelmed. What you don't want is a situation where they've never been overwhelmed, and the first time they're overwhelmed, they jump out of a window. That would be bad. And so in a controlled environment, showcasing, it was that using Star Trek, the Kobayashi test, the no-win scenario was this so that then Captain Kirk cheats so he doesn't have to experience it. But the concept of taking somebody through this, what are you going to do if you're overwhelmed, and teaching them there's always a way out. There's a way to ask for help. There's a way to get assistance. There's a way to just sit down, and maybe the fact that you're overwhelmed is something that you're doing to yourself, and all you got to do is stop doing whatever that is. But if you don't go through that thought process in a controlled environment first, where people are there to help you, there's a good chance when you go through that experience in a non-controlled environment, something really bad's you might commit suicide. You might go into a deep depression and not come out of it. The people have gone catatonic for those kinds of pressures. And so there is my belief is maybe you do need to be stress tested throughout the process, so you understand how to deal with these problems in case they ever come up, and they don't become catastrophes. They just become a more difficult problem that you now know how to solve.
Yes, but isn't it a fact also that
Thank you.
people don't actually do something because they want to do it? I mean, people are different.
Right.
Every human being is different from the other one. So how are you generalizing on this?
Well, we kind of run from pain and run toward pleasure. They're both. The pain is a little more motivating. So, controlling that pain and pleasure can be.
Yes. We have our new friend, Mr. JZA. Hello. Are you with me? Mr. Eric, he's your friend?
He's both muted and his video's blocked.
Yeah, he popped in a couple times. I was waiting for the camera to be on. That's how you know people are ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's probably doing something else.
Mr. What his name? Mr. Eric, you know him?
JDA.
JCA.
Yeah, he's hangs around the metaverse a lot. I'm guessing probably Lisa forwarded this to him. He would be a good.
Okay.
Spokesman.
So, Professor Rob, what are the concluding remarks for today's sessions? And
Sure. So as we look at AI and the metaverse, the underlying effort really needs to be, depending on what the goal of the project is, but the overall effort needs to be to make sure that we improve the environment that we currently have. There has to be a process of consistent improvement with some kind of overarching goal for what it is we want to accomplish. And what I think we want to accomplish is a better race, whatever that is. And coming up with that clear goal of what does that mean? What does a better race? What would be the best human? And given we've got a timeline of, I think now 7 years until we reach singularity, we are on the clock, because there are two outcomes, at least I believe, of the singularity. One is we become obsolete, which is the one I just assume we avoid. And the other is we are enhanced by technology and we move ahead as an improved race. And I think a lot more effort needs to go into assuring the latter outcome and avoiding the former than we're currently undergoing. I'm very concerned right now about the number of companies that are laying off people, claiming that they're going to replace them with generative AI. I think that's a huge mistake at this point. One, I don't think generative AI is ready for this quite yet. And number two is, if you take AI down the path of replacement as opposed to enhancement, you're basically obsolescing yourself, and that shouldn't be anybody's goal. I would just as soon continue to live and exist on this plane. I'm sure pretty much everybody else on the panel would, and so creating a construct that lowers that probability, I think should be defeated. And so in the end, I think the focus and the overall effort to creating, whether it's an AI angel, which is fascinating with that other article, or an AI defensive structure that assures the outcome at an individual and societal level, becomes very important at this point and should be part of every major metaverse construct, to just assure that we're not doing harm, that there is an aspect of the overall effort that assures the outcome is the one that we want, and that's people working in some sort of symbiosis with regard to the technology that they're deploying. And so that's my closing comment.
Thank you. Mr. Eric.
We've seen that free markets can be dangerous. When you just say the market do what you want, we get things like slavery and things like that. From that perspective, sometimes it looks like slavery would be a good idea. So I'm not a real fan of throwing code into free market and saying, let's see what happens. I think that's inherently dangerous. On the other hand, I'm incredibly excited about what we can do. But I think this idea is, how do we measure where we want and see if we're going there? And that's the problem, is some things we don't know how to measure, like happiness. We don't even know. I mean, like when you take, instead of gross national product, you create gross national happiness, which has been done. So how do you measure this stuff and see where you're going? I think people are really on a journey. It's making sure that journey is the right one. We know the journey isn't all happy and nice. You have to have some challenges. I think relationships are, we all know that relationships, even if it's with a pet, have a marketed impact on happiness. So I think we could make the planet better. I think we can make people's lives better. I think we can do it faster. But finding that balance between control and freedom, the agility, is important. I think, an uncontrolled social media where people can create news pages that are fake, is damaging. And so to me, that's the real key. And I would just point out that it's not only the things we see up front. There's a whole bunch of infrastructure that's coming and developing, and they all have an impact. So way down the infrastructure that does this, if you start letting AI within all those pieces, some good things can happen. But I think you have to watch out for the butterfly effect that Rob talked about.
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafal, what's your concluding remarks?
Okay. My concluding remarks center around making this world a better place. I think that's what we need to do, all of us. make this world a better place. So if we want to do that, what's the individual role in this world? That's what the question we have to ask ourselves. What the individual has to do in terms of happiness, in terms of his own personality, his or her own personality, versus the community and the collective sense of it. So I believe that what's being said is very, very important, both by Eric and by Rob. I think you've all touched on so many things that are very important. But I think that we need to embrace these new changes and go ahead with them so that we could test them out and try to find out. For example, I'm not sure about this issue of happiness, Rob. The issue of happiness is something that is very individual. And when we take decisions on making this world a better place, we have to make collective decisions. What's the society going to be like? That's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. JZA, you want to add something? Okay, thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I just want to share a very good news. World Talent Economy with Dhaka University. We are organizing a scientific conference on business sustainability. It will be 1 July and 2 July from World Talent Economy Forums. Professor Fred Philip will join as a keynote speakers March 1 and March 2. Uh, and and I want to invite you all this conference. We will share in Facebook Live, so you can join there. And beside that, we have our very interesting uh, conference, Nikola Tesla Technology Conference in July 16 and 17th. Those who are interested to submit research paper, you have to submit research paper before 15 March. So I request everyone, if you have a research paper, please submit your research paper, and then we can do very interesting conference. Thank you, Professor Rob. Thank you, Mr. Eric. Thank you, Dr. Talib Rafael and Mr. ZZA for joining today's sessions. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Okay, bye. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Eric. Bye.